welcome back to my channel. I'm JC, and today's video is going to be sharing my masterclass experience with David Baldacci as he teaches writing, mystery, and suspense. I love mystery. I love his books, and I love what he does with his storytelling. So I wanted to see how he does what he does so very well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the front end of this video. Without further ado, I will slide on over to David Baldacci, teaches writing, mystery, and suspense.
For me, everything comes down to the story. Regardless of the story you're trying to tell, it's about building a world that didn't exist before you thought of it. When I was asked by Masterclass to do this, I thought about it long and hard, and I didn't get back to them right away because I was wondering what could I contribute to this. I wanted to dig into the hardcore foundation of what it means to me to be a writer. I wanted to get into the weeds with all of you about how I live my life as a writer and how I go about my craft. This course covers a lot of stuff, and I'm trying to give you the basics on a lot of things. For instance, I was a lawyer when I first started writing my first novel, so I had a day job. And I work long hours. So I talk about how do you divvy up your day, and when do you find time to write. As far as the story itself, great characters. How do you come up with them? How do you pace a story so that people can't stop turning the pages? How much research do you have to do? Where do you go? How do you get it? What do you do with it once you have it? Do you leave it all in, or do you take most of it out? So I have filled this course, as you'll see in the workbook, with edited manuscript pages, editorial letters, scenes that I read from books, lots of different applications that I have used over the course of my career to become a better writer. So any writer out there who's doubting their ability to actually sit down and tell a story, this course is for you, because I'm telling you, I got your back on this. I was there. I know what you're going through. I was on the outside of the glass looking in for well over almost 2 decades. I know what it's like to be on the outside thinking, this is never going to happen for me. In this course, I try to dispel some of those doubts, because you know what? There's power in numbers. If you know you're not alone in something, then all of a sudden those doubts and insecurities start to fade away. This is how I did it. These are some of the tools and the tactics and techniques that work for me. I'm giving these to you as a takeaway so you can look at them and consider them. Use the ones you want, tweak the ones that you're interested in, throw away the ones you don't really care about or don't agree with, and then move on with your career. I'm David Baldacci, and this is my masterclass. Probably the question I get most of all when I'm out on tour from writers, where do you get your ideas from? And the answer is not simple, but it can be made a little more simple by what I'm about to tell you. Writing isn't a job or an occupation or a hobby, it's a lifestyle. So for all of you out there, it has to be something you incorporate in your life as you go through your daily routine. I get ideas from waking up in the morning and walking out the door. And I look at the world through a writer's prism, as I call it. It's sort of cocked a little bit, and I see everything that everybody else sees, but what I look through, and I look at the potential of what could be out there if I sort of add a little pixie dust, fictional pixie dust to something. You can't just see what's out there in black and white. That's what everybody else does. And those people are not going to be writing novels or screenplays or anything. They just see the world and they forget it and move on. Your job is to see the world and then realize the potential of what is out there every single day, every single minute of every single day. If you just look at the world, twist your prism a little bit, and think, if I combine a couple of elements of my imagination, I can make the scene of a plane flying over and a truck passing by and a guy looking out a window. I can make that into a compelling story. All I need to do are connect the dots. You just have to see the world and feel the world in a way that is so visceral that 99.9% of the rest of the population are totally oblivious to. Writing anything is a long, hard slog. It's going to take you a while. You're not going to finish a novel over a weekend. It's just not going to happen. So you have to set yourself up for success and not failure. And how do you do that? Well, make sure that this long road that you're going to start off on is something you're actually interested in and have a passion about. So if a lot of the books out there that have been successful, you see like Michael Crichton, who wrote about dinosaurs, he had an interest in that stuff. He had an interest in science. He had an interest in, whether Japan was going to rise up and overtake the American economy when he wrote Rising Sun, or Dan Brown with code books, or John Grisham with the legal world. But they had a fascination and an interest for that stuff. And if you do, trust me, one, your research will be better. Two, your plots will be better because you'll invest more time, because that focus is there, because I want to be in this moment. I want to write this stuff, not because I'm chasing a trend. Set yourself up as a writer for success. Make sure, this could take me a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to do. I'm going to hang in there because I'm actually interested in what I'm writing about.
Okay, so the first lesson is really just the introduction, where he talks about what he wants to tell you in his class, or over the course of the entire class. The second one is finding the idea, where he talks about the ideas being everywhere you look. You just have to take the time to be observant enough to see things. He calls it his writer's prism, but to see things through a different lens than most people see things. He said he gets ideas just walking out the door. Anytime he feels stuck, he just walks outside or takes a walk around, and ideas just come. Next lesson.
Research for me is critical because the worlds I write about are pretty complicated, but they're also a definite thing. If I write about the military, I really can't make stuff up. If I write about Secret Service agents who pull wands out and can fly, nobody's going to read the book. So I have to learn about those things. As a writer, you have to take off the novelist hat and you put on the journalist cap. So I go in and, I figure out how to get to people that I need to know things about, and I interview them, become a journalist, and have conversations and learn a lot. I go to the places that I write about because I want to see it firsthand, have a visceral connection to it. I don't like getting things third hand from people because that puts their opinions and their biases into what I'm trying to find out. So if you take the time to go out and learn about this stuff firsthand, you will bring a depth and a breadth of both plotting and writing to your prose that will lift you out of the slush piles and actually enhance your chances of getting picked up by a publisher or an agent. Every book that I've written, I've done a ton of research for all of them, and I think the books are far better because of it, and I think yours will be too. When I'm sort of firming up the idea that I'm going to write a particular novel, let's say that I've got the location, the venue sort of set. I'll give you an example of a book I wrote called No Man's Land. It was a John Pollard thriller. And a lot of it was going to be set at a place called Fort Monroe in Virginia. It's in the Virginia Beach, Newport News area of Virginia. Okay, if I'm going to write about this place, then I need to go there. And I drew up my battle plan. I made a lot of calls, I talked to people, wrote letters, emails and stuff. And so I went and took a visit at Fort Monroe, and I took my recorder, I took my pad, my steno pad, and a lot of questions in my head. So I met with people. I spent the whole day. We walked all over the place. So that's your battle plan. And I call it a battle plan because it is. You have certain goals that you want to accomplish when you go and make visits. And it may be that I go to this place and I think I'm going to get everything done in a day, and I realize it's not happened. All of a sudden, I'm getting intrigued and I go down another pathway because something of interest occurred that I didn't know or expect was going to happen. So allow yourself flexibility and latitude to sort of adapt organically to what's on the ground. You just have to. Locations are critical to a novel because they can become a character in the novel, particularly if it's an extraordinary sort of place. And I don't mean it has to be some exotic place. It can be extraordinary in the fact that it's a center of despair and hopelessness. Geographical locations can imprint themselves upon people's souls and psyches and emotions and make them less caring, make them feel like they would do things that they otherwise would never contemplate doing. So I like putting my characters in places like that because it just makes it, I think, it makes it more monumental. The stakes seem to be higher. The idea that anything could happen because of where I've set this. So when you're picking geographical locations, don't pick it because I'll just throw a dart at a map. Pick it because you could realize the potential of that geographic location also rising to the level of a character in the book. You as a writer, if you do anything else, if you do nothing else with what I'm telling you on research, do this. Leave almost all of it out. You will thank me later. Writers can be really great procrastinators, and one way to convince yourself you're actually working hard on the book is to just go too heavy in the research. You're out there, yeah, it's going to take me a few months to do this research, and I'm having a good time doing it. Oh, maybe it's going to take me an extra month, because you really don't want to sit down and write the story. Research is fun, it's hard work too. No research is as hard as actually writing the story. It's not even close. I know it's just so attractive to just keep researching. It's almost like being a permanent student, going back to college. You got 16 degrees because you don't really want to work in the real world. So at some point, mom and dad like, no, you gotta grow up. Just as a writer, just realize you got to grow up and stop the research and write the book.
So, lesson 3 and 4 were both about research, part 1 and 2. And he was talking about how doing extensive research, can make a better book. Don't just assume you know about how something is done. Talked also, he kind of ended with this about knowing enough when there's been enough research. Don't go so heavy. Research is important, but don't go so heavy on the research that you're now procrastinating writing the book. So, research thoroughly, but not um, too heavily, so heavily that you're not writing the book. And know when to put it down. He said that most of the research you're going to end up doing, leave most of it out. Um, you're not going to need most of the research. So, um, do a good amount of research, but know when to write the book already, essentially. Next lesson.
I get asked this question a lot. Do you outline the whole thing from A to Z? Do you outline a little bit as you go along? And the answer is yes to all of those. Every writer that I know does it a little bit differently. What I tend to do is I will do 2 sets of documentation, I'll call it that, where I've got a little binder where I've got some, blank pages, and I do like broad movements, broad sweeps of what I would like to accomplish during the course of that story. And it's very rudimentary. It's just kind of a first stab at it. But I have these big movements, some of the movements in a musical score. These are the big things that are going to be happening in this novel. And then my job is to fill in all the other stuff that actually makes them work and make sense. And then I have another notebook where I sort of go chapter by chapter. The great thing for all of you as the writer, you can do it any way that you want. And there's another added benefit. The longer you write, guess what? You can change the process that you do. You may go from outlining everything to just sitting down and just winging it every day and see how it feels. Or you could go back to, but it evolves. Don't sort of hamstring yourself into thinking, I can only do it this way. One reason why I don't like to outline the whole book is that I know that a lot of the stuff is going to fall by the wayside when I try to execute it in the novel. It's very different writing an outline. It seems very structured. Number one, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Writing a novel is not that. Every page you write, you learn something about the story you want to tell that you don't get when you write the outline. So every page that you write, you're growing as a writer into that story. And it's almost like at the beginning of it, you were starting high school. At the end of the novel, you just got your PhD handed to you pertaining to that story. So that's why I think outlines are good, but you have to understand their limitations, and you have to work in an equal way, an equitable way with outlining and actually organically writing and creating the story. Use your outlines when it's necessary, but understand they have severe limitations. Let your mind grow and flow as a writer, because that's the whole point of it.
Okay, so lesson number 5 is about outlining. And he talks about the different, well, first he talks about the different extremes of outlining. You know, those people who like to outline from point A all the way to point Z. They want to know every single detail that's going to happen in the novel before they can start. And then, of course, those who don't outline at all. And he says he falls somewhere in the middle. He likes to, um, his outline kind of looks like an assortment of bullet points, notes in the side margins, just, different things. He doesn't like to do the from point A to point Z because he knows it's probably not going to end up in the book exactly the way he puts it. So he does like to detail what he wants to happen in a specific chapter, but not necessarily how he's going to get there until he actually sits down to write. He was talking about including the small details because sometimes the small details are what make up, the good parts of the book because every little detail counts. He says, even if you're an outliner, even an extreme outliner, make room for evolution, because you don't want to be so hell bent on sticking to the script of what you've outlined from point A to point Z that in the course of writing the story you don't see the different avenue that you could take to make the book that much better because it's not an outline. You have to be open to taking different avenues even if they deviate from that outline. So really good lesson. Next lesson.
I always like to come up with, I call it the big pop. And the big pop is, how is the novel going to open? Because if you don't get that right, it doesn't matter what else you write after that because nobody's going to bother to finish reading it. So the big pop is really important. So I need to understand intimately how that scene is going to unfold and how it's going to drive the rest of the story. I got the big pop. It's almost like a little self-encapsulated short story. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write those first few chapters. And then all of a sudden you're over that hump of, oh my God, how do I do this? Because when you write those first few chapters, all of a sudden you open up all these possibilities for all these other plot threads. And all of a sudden, there's all this stuff you can write about. And the problem of, I don't know how to start it, goes away. While I'm writing a novel, I constantly go back to the first chapter. Sometimes every time that I go back to the novel, I could be in the middle or near the end, and I go back to that first chapter. That's my touchstone. That should be a writer's touchstone. That's how you open this compelling story to the world. I can't think of a more important chapter than the first chapter. In some ways, it's more important than the last chapter of a book. Because this is the only shot you have to get it right for the first time. So I constantly go back to that chapter 1. I want to have it pristine and perfect in every way, but also because I need to make sure that every element in that chapter is there for a reason, because all the threads coming out from the first chapter permeate the rest of the novel. So if I got something wrong here, I've got something wrong here. That's why I constantly go back to that. That's like the mothership. If you don't go back to the mothership constantly, then you don't know what the rest of the fleet is really doing, and it's actually going to make sense at the end. So that should be your touchstone. It always is for me. And the thriller genre is such that there's this sense of momentum and this sense of hurry up because we got to get to something monumental. The short chapters are like punches, rapid punches in the face. It doesn't have to be all about action and somebody getting killed or bombs going off. It could just be conveying information. But it's like that. It's like that rapidity of motion where people get into this rhythm of, okay, I understand this is really rocking and rolling and there's short bursts of stuff. I've got to pay attention. I'm on for this ride. I don't have to drift through 15 or 20 pages of stuff. And you have to be really disciplined in order to construct a novel that way, because again, this even heightens the importance of each chapter. When you write a screenplay, and I've written screenplays before, directors will challenge you, and producers will read this stuff and they'll sit across from you and go, why is that scene in there? Why is this person driving the narrative? Why is that person saying this? How are you going to get out of that scene? What's the second purpose why the scene is in there? Because the scene is costing a lot of money for us to shoot. So there can't just be one reason for the scene. It's got to be more than that. What is it? Ask yourself, why am I writing this chapter 12? Just because it follows chapter 11 and it's the one before chapter 13? Is it a bridge to something? Are you driving the plot forward? Are you conveying information? Are you deepening a character in some way? And I'm saying those are the only three you could have, but those are three pretty important and critical and ubiquitous purposes in a novel. So ask yourself, what's the purpose and what is it? And how am I going to convey that in the novel? So always ask yourself, what is the reason I'm writing this chapter right now in front of me? What is the purpose? What am I trying to convey? If you can't answer one of those three questions in a positive way, convey information, character development, or moving the plot forward, then don't write the chapter.
Lesson number 6 was about constructing the chapters. So he quickly talked about starting the chapter with a big, well, he calls his the big pop, but a big action scene or a big moment, something that the readers are going to remember and maybe even reference back to. He talked about making the first chapter your touchstone, kind of having it as a reference point to look back on. And he said how he knows sometimes if he's gotten too far off track, if he gets to, like, say, chapter 10 and it doesn't match up with something he said in chapter 1. He talked about giving your chapters purpose. If there's not a message or a point to the chapter, if it doesn't express what you're trying to get across to the reader in a meaningful way, then what is the point of the chapter? And creating momentum with short chapters. He said he used to write really long chapters, but in long chapters you can hide weaknesses, you can hide things that don't necessarily need to be there. And with short chapters, especially in a thriller or suspense novel, short chapters are really good for creating that momentum, that keeping the edge of your seat feeling for the reader. So yeah, next lesson.
Building mystery into your thrillers is paramount. It's important. Because all thrillers have a sense of mystery. You could look at like a Dan Brown's books. You wouldn't necessarily classify them as simply as mysteries. They're thrillers. They take place all over the world, and the stakes are very high. But there are clues that his characters follow to try to resolve some type of issue. You write a story that's not a thriller or a mystery. The story's beautiful. It has characters and dialogue and narrative and all that. But the mystery component adds another layer. You have to have clues and red herrings and twists and deception, and you're trying to fool the reader until the end, before they discover who did it. It's a house of cards, unlike any other book. If I start off with a clue that's here, that clue has to mean something up here, when the book is nearing its finish. And if I get that connection wrong, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. So you have to build those pieces in. And this is where it's really important to take the baby steps and to do a little piece at a time. Don't try to think of the whole mystery all at once. How everything's going to fit together fluidly and all that. That's impossible. That's overwhelming. You'll be paralyzed. You won't be able to write a single word. So just start with one thing. Please take baby steps. You don't have to do everything in one day. What's a thriller without great suspense? Everybody wants to be on the edge of their seats, nervous, not knowing what the next page is going to bring to them. And that's where I live. That is my sweet spot. That's where I'm in my element. So I love to open stories with suspense right from the get-go. I hit the ground running. And oftentimes I do that with a loss somehow. Somebody loses something in those first few pages, and then all of a sudden the suspense is there, because loss always leads to retribution, to a payback. And people don't know how that's going to happen, where it's coming from. It can happen on the very next page, and all of a sudden the suspense is there. The difference between a good plot twist and one that's, out there is the reaction you're going to get from people. And the reaction is going to be, I can tell you what the reaction is going to be with a bad plot twist. Well, that was stupid. He didn't. And the reason it's stupid is you didn't lay any groundwork for that twist to happen, plausibly anyway. So people, not only didn't they not see it coming, but they didn't see it coming because you didn't set anything up for them to see it coming. The great plot twists are where you've laid a foundation for it, and then all of a sudden the twist happens, and then instead of saying it's stupid, the reader goes, I should have seen that one coming. Of course, it makes perfect sense. And the only way you do that is to plausibly build a scenario that allows that plot twist to happen down the road. And it's detail by detail, morsel by morsel, clue by clue. I love getting emails from readers, and you will too. And here's the phrase you'll hear a million times. God, I never saw that coming. I thought it was, but of course it wasn't. And as I read along, I was like, why did that happen? And then you explained it fully, but again, I never saw it coming. That's what you want to have as a writer. You want to have readers saying, I never saw that one coming. Red herrings are making people render misassumptions about something. They assume, but it's a misassumption. And you laid it out there for them. It's all right there. I told you the plane went over. I told you there was a red light in the sky and this sound of a plane going over. And you just assume, well, it must have been a plane, right? And later on, when you find out maybe it wasn't a plane, then that's a red herring. So those are the types of things you have to think about, right? That's why I say writers have to be writers, magicians, because, the red herring over here. And I have to show it, but I don't want you to focus on it too much. I do something really interesting over here, and you look over there, and then it's gone. That's the kind of the response you elicit from that would be like, I never saw that one coming. A lot of times in editorial letters coming back for me in my novels, my editor, and it's good that he does, a comment will be like, I don't feel the time ticking here. I feel like, a little bit of focus has been lost. I think we strayed a little bit away from the main plot, and I'd like to get you back on the track to keep this moving forward. I want to feel the nervousness that something is about to happen, and it's not going to be, prevented in time. So that's a great way to sort of instill tension in a read, because you want that, particularly in a thriller. It could be you have to find someone. It could be you have to prevent something from happening. It could be you have to uncover a clue or support. That clue allows something really bad to happen to somebody or a lot of people or a place or a geographic location. But that ticking clock is a great way, and it has to be set up. You just can't throw it in and then forget about it. If you start a ticking clock in a novel, you have to keep coming back to it to give the reader who may not be totally aware where you're going with this, to let them know this is a signal. You know what? This is important. I like cliffhangers because they leave something unresolved. And you as a writer, what you really want to build is, when you say you want to build tension and suspense, just throw those words out and focus on this word instead, anticipation. What you want to build is anticipation. If something is going to happen, you don't know if it's going to be good, you don't know if it's going to be bad, but something is going to happen as soon as I turn that next page. And a cliffhanger allows you to do that. For me, thrillers are all about anticipation, and I love opening lines and I love closing lines in chapters where I give you something just enough that you can anticipate that something is going to happen momentarily, and you just got to find out what it is. It's like, you can't eat just one Lay's potato chip. You got to go for the whole bag. So for me to set it up that way, I love to build anticipation, because I know that most readers are going to be like, I got to read one more chapter.
Lesson number 7 is about pacing, tension, and suspense. He talks about creating or building mystery into thrillers and suspense novels, and how the mystery is the component that kind of keeps people reading a thriller and suspense novel, because it can be all action packed and everything, but without that mystery component, it's kind of like readers don't have a real reason to be invested in the story. He talked about laying the groundwork for plot twist. Don't just have a twist come out of nowhere with no lead up, so that the readers can know something's coming, not necessarily what, but just, so that it doesn't just pop up and spring up out of nowhere. Talks about cliffhangers and how he likes to leave chapters on this ending that makes you want to turn the page, and maintaining a ticking clock, kind of maintaining that level of suspense, like time is ticking. You have to, when you're reading it, you feel like, how did he put it? Um, Basically to instill tension, anticipation for the next whatever's going to happen. Okay, next lesson.
I've read a lot of books in my life, and I'm sure you have too. Um, I don't always remember the plots of these books. The one what sticks with me in the element are characters. If you read To Kill a Mockingbird, you know sort of it has something to do with racism in the South, but you remember Scout. You remember Atticus Finch. You may remember Calpurnia, the maid. I really feel like Amos Ducker is one of my best characters ever because he's so unusual. And I remember getting a lot of emails from people after the book came out. Love Memory Man, but boy, that Amos Decker is annoying as hell. I can't take my eyes off him on the page, but boy, I'd like to kick him in the ass a couple of times too. But that's what I wanted because that makes a character memorable for both good and bad reasons. Because characters in a novel, the only shot that you have to connect on a human level with the reader. The plot doesn't do that for the most part, but the characters do. So you have to really invest a lot of time in creating characters that are not only deep but three-dimensional, seem real to people. They could walk out the street and say hello to these people and they would just interact with them as they would with anybody else. When I'm dealing with characters, I'm trying to explain somebody's situation and motivations. You have to look into their past because past always drives motivations. Think about an element I like to call baggage. And baggage really is just fodder. It's additional material that you can use to develop and deepen this character. And if it's going to be a series, then you can foreshadow things in that person's character and how you develop them to use later on in different books. What do you want this character to look like on page 1? What do you want the character to look like on page 500? Because they're going to change. They're going to evolve. That's what readers really want to look at. If you're going to put a character into a thriller where lots of crazy things are happening, how in the world can you expect the character not to be changed by the end of the novel? So I try to put as much time and effort into developing the protagonist as I do the antagonist because they're of equal importance. I like people who are in the gray areas where good people do bad things sometimes for the wrong reasons, and bad people who often do really bad things can do something good every once in a while, and that gives them depth, gives them complexity, and actually helps people to understand where they came from. Because oftentimes the backstory for the villains are equally, if not more, interesting than for the heroes and the protagonists in your novel. You have to give them equal weight. Before I sit down to write any scene of dialogue, one, I have to come up with my goal. What do I want this dialogue to accomplish? Deepening a character or furthering the plot or conveying information. But then you have to sit back and say, what is the emotional sequence of this scene? Are the people angry with each other? Has something traumatic just happened and they have to sort of flush it out between the two? Is one going to cast blame on the other person for something? Are they happy? They've just had a big triumph or victory and they're ecstatic and they feel good. That's all going to impact how the dialogue is going to play out. So what is the conflict, of any, that you're trying to work through in this particular dialogue? Not only do you have to understand what the scene is for, what is the emotional circumstance of the dialogue? My rule of thumb with dialogue is to keep it, is brevity. Keep it brief and punchy and conveying information, and then moving on. Common mistakes are going on too long, getting off point, going down tangents, and then just losing focus of the scene. For conveying information that later on has no purpose at all in the novel, or doesn't deepen a character in some way. So for me, when you go and you're writing dialogue, before you even sit down to write the first line, sit down and say, what do I want this dialogue to accomplish? And once it's accomplished the goal, you get out of the scene and you stop. You don't go on for 6 more lines. I found that the best way to really get good at dialogue is to listen to people talking to each other under lots of different circumstances, and strangers versus really good friends. And I think in order to write really believable dialogue, this is the critical time where you as the writer need to be a student of humanity. You just need to go out and listen to people and watch their body language. Go out and about, listen to people, even if it's in your own house, talking, your kids are talking, your wife's talking, your husband's talking, whatever. Listen to people, listen to them on the phone where you only get one half of the conversation to see what it sounds like, it feels like. That is really the best exercise. Just live in it in a real moment and then go back home and see if you can duplicate that to an astonishingly accurate degree. And if you can, all of a sudden, your dialogue is going to sound a lot better. Action can be just for action's sake. You want a jolt of adrenaline and get the reader kind of juiced again. If maybe the story had flagged a little bit, so all of a sudden you just throw a strike right down the middle and see if they can hit it. But action can also convey information about a location, about someone's motivation, about someone's special skills. And for putting together realistic fight scenes, I think you, again, have to draw a perimeter around what's believable and plausible and what's not. And for me, I want to have a visceral feel about the effect. When somebody's in a fight, both people are probably going to get some consequence to it. They're going to get hurt. Somebody's going to get got shot or knifed or hit or bruised or wounded in some way. So the totality of it shouldn't be on one side or the other. And I like it where I like to slow down action scenes. And you need to allow the moment to have its moment, I guess, and not just gloss over it. I like to ground all of my action scenes in a real visceral sense of reality. Here is plausible, and out here is sci-fi. You never want to get out to sci-fi unless you're writing sci-fi. If you're writing a thriller, you just don't want to get there. You have to make it plausible. So you have to rely on how you build the character, what special skill sets do they have, what is the situation where maybe they could use something there that you set up that helps them survive. But I think even if somebody has a special skill set like a Will Roby, what makes it believable and plausible is if there are consequences and repercussions to that person, even though they did survive it.
Lesson number 9 and 10. Number 9 is about crafting dialogue. And it talks about using dialogue, but identifying the emotional context in the dialogue. If the dialogue doesn't disclose a conflict or doesn't have a message, doesn't serve a purpose, why are these two characters talking? No one in a book has a conversation without there being a reason or a purpose. Talks about making every word count. Don't use words just to be filling the page. Make them mean something. Make them matter. He talks about becoming a student of humanity, and in that he means being observant, listening to people's conversations, how they talk, listen to like the one side of a conversation to see how it sounds, maybe imagine what the other side of the conversation sounds like. He said that's how you get better at crafting dialogue, by listening to other people's conversations and how they talk to one another. And lesson number 10 talks about writing action, using action to convey information, also using action to dig deeper into a character, their mindset, how they operate, how they think, sometimes how they feel, delaying certain actions if you're writing like a kill scene, delaying certain actions to get the most emotional context out of that action. But also he says to have the action grounded in reality. Like, unless you're writing fantasy or sci-fi, the action has to be something that's plausible, something that can actually really happen in the real world. So, next lesson.
Editing process is something I really love and enjoy. I do it in a twofold sort of step. I like to edit all the way through the manuscript, from the first chapter all the way through. As I continually go back to it, I'm writing, I go back to previous chapters, particularly the first few chapters. I revise, I revise, I revise. So by the time I've finished the manuscript, I've probably edited this thing maybe a dozen times. Then comes the big boy, and that's when I print everything out. I take it to my editing desk, I plop 500 pages down, I pull up my pens, red and blue pens, and I just bloody the page, because this is where you turn a manuscript into an actual novel. I know that a lot of the stuff I put into the first draft is not going to stay in. I know I'm going to move things around. Scenes are going to be cut. Other scenes are going to be added. I'm going to develop characters a little bit more. Action scenes may be parsed down or maybe embellished a little bit. I think when you're editing a novel, everything is fair game. And I've done novels where a lot of it was focused on, the editing process was focusing on the plot. And I had very little to do as far as deepening the characters. I had the characters pretty much where I wanted them to be. And I described them the way I wanted to describe them. Then it comes to building blocks. Are they in the right place or not? Now, I have a plot point that's out of place and it sort of blows up the rest of the action going forward. That happens a lot, and I just have to move things around here or there. Or I may get to the point where I figure out, I've got A, B, C, D, and then I go to F, and I forgot E. I need to put E in to have sort of a clarifying bridge to get to the next spot in the action in the novel. So I'll go ahead and invent that and put that in. During the editing stage, it's critical that you have to walk away from the material at some point. Here's what I typically do. I'll send the first draft up, and the first draft's going up to people, the editors. So long as they have it, I don't look at the draft again. I go off and work on something else. I sort of cleanse my mind, cleanse my palate. I forget about the story and all that. And when it comes back down, then I come back and sit down at it. I've got a clean look at it again because I've been away from the material. And then all of a sudden my eyes are fresh and I'm looking at the story again in a new light. There is a real danger of over-editing a manuscript. And again, this is where you have to wear the writer's cap and the psychologist's cap at the same time. You can't take one off and put the other one on. You have to wear them simultaneously. You have a tendency as a writer to want to make something absolutely perfect. But in doing that, you're almost guaranteed to make it imperfect, even worse than it actually was before. And the longer you have it, the chances are you're going to make it not better, but you're going to make it worse. So when the words are where you want them to be and the story is where you want it to be, take a step back, listen to other people who have given you comments about it, go back, sit down, and read it through. And if it's a story that you wanted to tell, and warts and all, and then let it go, and then you move on to the next book. And that's how you build a career.
Lesson 12 was about editing and revising. Editing apparently is his favorite part of the process. He talked about knowing, like, everything being fair game, knowing when to cut things, knowing when you've put something in the book that doesn't necessarily need to be there. You just needed to get it out in that moment, and knowing when to let things go. He talked about walking away from the manuscript for a little while and being able to come back to it with fresh eyes and going over it again. But he also cautioned people not to over edit and said that at some point, we have a tendency to look for perfection, for the project to be perfect. That's how some people end up working on books for 7 or 8 years, but nothing is ever going to be perfect. And he said sometimes the more you edit something, you could be making it worse. He basically said, is it the story that when you read over it at the end, once it's finished, is it the story that you wanted to tell? Is it what you set out to do with these characters, with this story, plot point, all of that? Does it convey what you wanted it to? And if it does, then you have to learn how to let it go. So that's it. Next lesson.
In the process of selecting editors at a publisher, The first thing I would probably look at and say, who else have they edited? Have they edited books in my genre? And if so, can I see some of the editorial letters? Or maybe I want to talk to some of the writers that they've worked with to see what kind of relationship they have. If an editor has not edited a thriller writer before and really hasn't done a lot of work in that genre, it's a really specialized genre, I might be a little bit hesitant unless that person, after meeting them, have other characteristics that I think would just be far more positive than negative. So I look into what they've done, who they work with, what they've edited, look at some of their sample editorial letters to see, everybody has a different style. Sit down and talk to the person, see if there's chemistry there. And there has to be. Sometimes they're a great editor, but you just don't connect with them. And if you don't, it's kind of hard to really have trust and confidence in a person. So I think at a personal level, you connect with them. And then secondly, what have they worked on before? And does that really match up with the genre that you're working in? Editorial relationships are critical for any writer. I've had various editors over the years, people I respected and admired. I've had the same editor, American editor, for probably my last 15 or 16 books. We built a very close relationship. It has to be one of confidence and trust in particular, and I have that with him. Writers have to understand this, and this is kind of critical. When an editor makes comments about your manuscript, it's not that they're making it to belittle it or that you didn't do a good job or they think you could have done better. What they're trying to do is make this manuscript as absolutely good as it possibly can be. So you both have the same goals. Your goals are aligned. You want to make it better. That person wants to make it better. I need a good editor will tell you where are the weak spots, where you've missed the mark, where the characters are not delivering, where the dialogue sounds a little flat, where the pacing is waning, and where the plot is not plausible. That's where I need them to tell me where my weaknesses are. It should be a respectful, collaborative partnership. And you have to give the person respect for what they're trying to do, and he or she will give the same to you. So, not any word you write as a writer is set in stone. Please bear that in mind. Not any word you write is set in stone. It's subject to respectful comments from people that you trust. And take those comments in a respectful way, knowing that the person is well-intentioned. Even though I have lots of eyes looking at it and people that I trust, I always feel like the buck stops with me. And if something gets through at the end, then it's my fault. So I'm very careful in going through it by word, line by line. Sometimes I'll read the line backwards because sometimes then errors jump out at you a lot more cleanly than they would if you're just reading. Because, look, the human brain glosses over stuff. And if there's a mistake, the human brain just fools you and says, oh, no, it's fine. Just keep reading. And that's how mistakes are made. So it's about getting a bunch of eyes on it. But you as the writer, buck stops with you.
Okay, so lesson number 13, he talked about working with an editor. So not just editing and revising yourself, like in lesson number 12, but when you seek out or find an editor, he was talking about the important things is to establish a connection, to make sure you two click, that you're on the same page, that you can trust your editor, to not just to be able to edit your work effectively and efficiently, but to be able to be brutally honest with you about your work, when something's working, when something's not working. You have to trust your editor that they know what they're doing and they know what would sell a good book and what would be best for the book. So, yeah, that was that.
I think the decision writers have to make, that all of you have to make, is what kind of story you want to tell. I don't care if this is your first novel or your 50th novel. If you have the juice and you have the desire and the motivation and the material to start out writing a series, go for it. Don't tell yourself that I can't do a series because this is my first time. Don't box yourself into that. If you have a really cool character that you think can live beyond the confines of one novel, move on to the next and on to the next and on to the next, I would swing for the fences. One of the biggest things that you have to avoid when you're writing a series is inconsistency. Film sets have the scriptee who everything is about consistency. Where the books are placed, the wardrobe and all that has to be the same. Otherwise, people are like, whoa, something's really out of whack here. Same thing with a book. So if I write about a character who has a certain skill or a certain knowledge base or knows somebody or did something in her background, and the second book I screwed it up totally, or the third book or the fourth book I screwed up totally, then people are going to go, he doesn't even know what his characters did. If readers don't think you can master your own material, they don't trust you to do anything else right. And so you've lost them right from the get-go.
So lesson number 16, he talks about specifically about writing a series. He said for people not to box themselves in and don't get it into your head that you can't write a series, that you don't have a series in you, because you don't know until you at least try. He talked about allowing yourself wiggle room within the series, and by that he means write it in such a way that if people want to read it as a standalone, they can. They don't have to necessarily read it in order. He says to be consistent, to, I guess, kind of keep a log of what you're, because obviously we're not going to remember. Like if you have a series, if you're writing a series and you're like in book 4, you're not always going to necessarily remember what your character did in book 1, book 2, maybe not even book 3 if you have a memory like mine. So kind of keep a note somewhere, a book or something where you can have these things that you can make sure that you remain consistent. You don't want the reader saying that's not how that went in book 1. You don't want that. And don't write a following book just to write a book. Have a reason for that book to exist. If you can't think of a story or a plot line to continue that series, and then don't write the next book. That's basically what it said. Next lesson.
I really think that people who are meant to be writers will actually be accomplished writers because they can't stop. If one rejection knocks you out, then I don't think you were meant to be a writer anyway. But if you keep going through hundreds of rejections and dozens of years of really obscurity, anonymity, and nobody wants to buy your stuff, and then you have a breakthrough, it's because you were meant to be a writer. So just hang in there. Perseverance is the key. And trust me, you are not alone in this. I still get rejected to this day. I still write screenplays occasionally, and I send them out, and people come back and say, it was okay, but really didn't move us enough to want to buy this. Rejection is a part of life. Don't ever let it stop you following your dream. Any writer who tells you they were never rejected is lying to your face, because we've all gone through it. It's part of the process. It's part of wanting to be a writer. It's part of learning the craft. I was rejected many, many, many times early on in my career, and actually throughout my career. It's just something that goes with it, and you can learn from it, build from it, and move on. The only thing the writer can hope to do is to stick with it and to get better. Rejections can do a couple of things. One, they can hurt your feelings. Not a problem with that. My feelings were hurt often, and I would stew over it for a couple of days, but then you have to get over it and move on. Keep this in mind. The person you're sending this stuff to doesn't know you from Adam, and the reason they might have rejected it, because reviewing somebody else's writing is the most subjective business in the world. There's no objectivity about it. They could have had a bad day. They might have actually been a little envious of your storytelling skills, and they just want to give you the break. So if you can learn from constructive criticism, learn from it. Sometimes you get rejections back that actually will teach you something. And if you can take that piece of advice and put it into your writing, move on, do that. The drive has to come from inside of you. And what drives me is that writing is what I feel like I was born to do. And if I'm not spending my time in the world of words and stories and twists and turns and characters and dialogue, I'm just not a happy person. People who know me will tell you that I am not nice to be around when I'm in between stories, because I'm just jittery and I'm pacing and I'm not happy and I'm a little just a curmudgeon to be around, because I don't have that thing in front of me, that little toy in front of me that I love to play with. So that's what drives me, because I can't really imagine my life without it. The key is that part of being a writer is constantly filling up your well of ideas, and that's by experiencing life and seeing the world through the writer's prism, like I talked about before. If you do that, your well of ideas will continue to be replenished. It's not like you're born with a certain number and then you drain it out and you're done, you walk away. You keep filling it up with the life that you live. After after watching this class, I would love it if people would take away from the lessons that this is just one person's opinion on how to approach the craft of writing. There are a billion others, and I'm sure every person who's sat in this chair or done this program had different ways of telling stories, different methods and processes they use. But it really all comes down to commitment to wanting to be a writer and being a storyteller. This world always needs fresh voices. Writers change the world. Books change the world. Everybody's waiting for the next book that people will read and say, my God, this is a brilliant piece that makes me examine my whole life and what the world should be. So that all of you are the next component. You're the next vital cog in keeping this world of publishing and books and reading going. So I'm proud to sit in this chair and talk to all of you and encourage you to pursue this, because as much as you might need a class from me, and I'm giving you some advice and tidbits and pieces of things that you could use in your life, I and the rest of the publishing world and the world in general, we need you a lot more. So for that hardworking writer who's trying to make it, they have a job, they have a family, they're writing in the middle of the night, they're keep getting rejections, their career seems to be stalled, nothing seems to be working, they feel, their confidence is ebbing away, that they're not going to be in the right place at the right time, nobody's going to see their material and actually appreciate it, and it's just not going to happen for them. I was there with you at the same moment in time, and all of that was happening to me, all those doubts were creeping into me. What kept me going was simple. I couldn't stop writing. Writers who are meant to be writers will be writers, because they're that inner drive that will not allow you to stop. And I've told people over the years, and I mean it, that if I'd never been published, even at this date, I would still be writing, because it was such a critical, vital part of my life that I could not give up. If I had given it up, even though I hadn't been published, I would be a lesser soul and a lesser person than I am today. I would be, shadow image of what I could have been as a human being. That's how important the words are to me. And that will stand you through these tests of time. That will stand you through these periods where you think nothing is ever going to go right for me. That's the fuel that you can draw upon and the food you can draw upon to keep going. It's not a cliche. I'm not just saying it to make you feel good. I have lived that. So I know that it can work if you persevere. Follow the words and follow your hearts, and good things will happen.
And there you have it, my masterclass experience with David Baldacci as he teaches writing, mystery, and suspense. I got a lot out of that, especially on the writing a series and how he crafts his characters and makes them more memorable. The writing action part, because one of the things I struggle with in terms of mystery is writing action, in whether I'm conveying it enough or choreographing it in my mind correctly or whatever. So he gave some helpful tips on that front, and I hope you got a lot out of this masterclass experience with me, and that it would make you hopefully want to go take the entire class, because there's so much more to learn from actually going to take the class yourself. And if you are interested in writing mystery and suspense, it is well worth taking it, and you will not regret it. And that's going to be it for this video. If you like what you see and you want to see more videos from me, make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button. Let me know in the comments what masterclass you would like to see me take. Next up is N.K. Jemisin. It has been requested a few times, so that is going to be the next masterclass in the series. And yeah, so let me know which ones you'd be interested in seeing me take. It doesn't have to necessarily be just writing, by the way. So I'm open for any suggestions. And with that said, as per usual, if you would like to support me in any of my creative endeavors, the links to my blog site, my magazine, my online store, and my Ko-fi can all be found in the description box if you would like to support me in those ways. Until next time, have a blessed day. Bye.